Hi, this is Brett Amron.
I'm Jeff Bast, and this is the Practice Podcast. Welcome. Today we have a special guest, as you can see. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening, you won't be able to see. We have our guest is Allen Moreland, an attorney with Access Law Group. Hello, Allen. Want to introduce yourself to our millions of listeners?
Hi guys, how are you doing?
How you doing,
Great.
Alan? Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Fantastic. We're happy to have you. Why don't you
Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
give the people a little bit of your background. Where are you from?
Okay, yeah, thanks. Well, I am essentially a finance attorney. I started out working in New York. I started my career in New York City. I spent about 20 years there after law school. And I've always had a sort of a specialization in Latin America and Caribbean oriented transactions. And, I do finance work across the board, debt issuances, securitization, loans, secured loans, sovereign debt, just about anything you can think of, I've done at some point.
How do you, a lawyer in New York in finance, get involved with Latin America or Latin American transactions?
That's in my instance, it was kind of a string of coincidences. But basically, although I grew up in the Midwest, I grew up in a relatively small city in Indiana and had very little exposure to, Latin Americans growing up. But there had been someone in our family who had been, actually my aunt and uncle had been exchange students in Brazil. And when they came back, we had a sort of a series of other exchange students came and stayed with our family. And so I got to know Brazil that way. And then when I was in law school, when I was in my last year of law school, and I had been working part-time and had, a little bit of money in my pocket, I said to one of my friends, let's just, this was like late February in 1988, I can remember it exactly. And of course, it's very cold in New York. And I said, let's just go somewhere for a week and enjoy ourselves. And we got out in those days, travel was, you found travel packages in the newspaper. So I went to the travel section of the New York Times and just, I saw this sort of one ad for, special, week package, Rio de Janeiro, hotel and flight. And we took that, and I went down and really fell in love with the country. And then after I had taken the bar, something that we could do back in those days was that I took a few months off before I started, my first year job. And I went and I spent 5 months in Brazil, just getting to learn the language and getting to, understand the country. And then everything sort of sprung off after that, really.
Tudo bem.
And then, what's that?
Tudo bem. Yeah.
Tudo bem, tudo bem.
That's all I remember. I took Portuguese for one semester in college, and that's all I remember from that. So it's a great language, though. Obviously, very similar to Spanish.
The one thing, Alan, you said there that I think is maybe gets lost in the shuffle, that if there's any law students listening to us, that the fact that you took 3 months off after law school before going to work. So I think nowadays people tend to graduate, take the bar, and start working the next day. So kudos to you.
Yeah, it's and I think that's interesting for anyone young who may be listening. Is I also remember when I was in law school, I went to Columbia Law School, and I had the possibility. Law school was 3 years. I had the possibility of doing a combined MBA, GD, or JD in 4 years, and I was just like, 1 year? I just don't have 1 year, an additional year to spend studying. And looking back, it just seems kind of ridiculous. But when you're young, you're in a hurry and you want to get somewhere fast. So
yeah,
sometimes it's it's good to have a different perspective. Although I do think people of today's generation, that makes me sound so old, have a little bit of a different perspective than we had at the tail end of the 80s.
Yeah, so you're starting in New York, spent obviously some time there. At some point, you made your way down here to Miami.
Indiana, New York, Miami.
Yeah, right. The natural progression: Indiana, New York, Miami. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes when I think back, I feel like I've lived forever. I've lived through so much, but what really prompted the move to Miami, because in those days there were really, especially for Brazil work, there were really two places you could work from. You could work from New York, a little bit lesser level of work in those days. And I had just started working. I started working in early 2001 at a firm that was located in the World Trade Center. And we went through everything. We went through the whole 9/11 tragedy. And after that, I said, I really want to start thinking about maybe living someplace that isn't New York City. And so I started talking to the people at the firm I eventually went to work with, which is where Jeff was working, and where some of my present partners also started out, people like Jeff Gutches and Ben Wolkoff.
Yeah, so think about it, 20 years removed from 9/11, and for a different reason, right? We're having a bit of an exodus from New York down here again. Interesting.
Yeah, that's why I sometimes feel like I've lived forever. It's like how many of these things can you go through? And I think back in I think back to 1988, we had a classmate that we always thought was a little humorous, and one time, and I had a group of friends that was a little bit cynical, and this guy came up to us and he says, I've got my offer. I just gotten engaged. Man, I'm now set for life. And I'm thinking, someone said that in 1988, and the profession has changed so much. Everything that has happened since 1988. And to think back then that you were in a situation where you're set for life is really humorous.
Yeah, so much changes, and especially I think that's true of big law. When you get a job at big law, everybody in law school, especially at the more I guess at every law school, they're all trying to get the bigger firm. There's a sort of hierarchy of thinking. The bigger the better, and it's not. It took me a long time to realize that hierarchy was just completely upside down in many respects, in my opinion. But you, like Brett and myself, made that transition from big law to more boutique practice. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Why'd you make that decision? How'd you do it?
Well, I was chased for a while by Jeff and Ben, and they are people that I knew well from our days at what was then Hutton and Williams. And I knew they were good lawyers, and they had, a very solid practice. And I think, I was at least going into something that was already very solid. But and I'd be interested in hearing your guys' experience also. But when you go from a large law firm to a smaller environment, there is a whole, I guess, superstructure of support that you don't have anymore, which can include, sort of referrals that come, from within the firm, and that whole engine that just can, keep a practice going. So it is, I'd be interested in knowing your guys' experience, but obviously it's a challenge when you move to that environment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I practiced at Hunton and Williams with you, and I don't think, at least for me, I didn't leave there because I was unhappy. I was very happy, great firm, great lawyers. I was truly content there, but I just felt like I needed something new, and I want a new challenge. I was getting ready to turn 40, and so I decided just to take the plunge, and kind of did some rough back of the napkin calculations and figured, okay, I think I can make this work. But you're right. The absence of that safety net and the protections of your colleagues and other lawyers and other practice areas, it's a little daunting. And I think part of why it worked for me is I didn't think that much about that. And I think that's part of the entrepreneurial spirit is that you just
Right.
know you're going to succeed, and failure is just it wasn't even in my calculus that it wouldn't work. And I remember having conversations with a lot of the folks at the firm about the move, and every without fail, every lawyer said, God, you're so brave. You're so brave. You're so brave. And I didn't even understand that comment. I didn't think of it as a bravery issue. I don't know if Brett had a different experience, but.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like you guys. I wasn't at a big law, more big boutique, I guess you can call it. I have all my rejection letters from the big firms. No, so for me, I mean, I agree. Similar. I didn't have to go anywhere. I wanted to branch out, more entrepreneurial spirit, do things kind of the way that I thought they should be done, run a firm, not to criticize the way another law firm runs itself. I just had different ideas and different thoughts, and wanted to sort of build this thing and create it. And I did, I enjoyed that, and I still do to this day, as we meander and progress over time. And I just, I see big law now, and I get why it's there, and I understand it, and it definitely has a place. But it's got to, I think, adapt, as the practice changes and society changes as well. And hourly rates are just getting crazy at those firms, and the machine, when you get involved, as we often do, as I'm sure you do as well, Alan, you see big law on the other side of a lot of the matters you're working on, and they come in and they're stacked with, at least in the litigation side, 4 or 5 lawyers, and the associates are billing at higher hourly rates than we are. And so that Jeff and I at our hourly rate. So it's just
exactly.
Something's got to change at some point, I would think. But the last point, just to sort of address, which is that people were saying the same thing to me, which is, boy, I wish I could do what you're doing. I wish I could do it. And I think, I didn't understand it at the time, but I can see why people would stay, right? Because it's very comforting.
Right.
And, I get that, and I understand it. And it takes a complete shift in your mindset to be able to go and take those risks, and do that. And so it's not for everybody, but I understand it.
And it was a lot of work. It is a lot of
Yeah.
work. Setting up the infrastructure and all that. I mean, Alan, you said you were a beneficiary of somebody of, Jeff and Ben's work. Brett and I, and the other thing is that you lose, and probably the biggest thing is just the peer level discussion. So being a solo practitioner, a pure solo, when I first started, I didn't have that. And I found that in Brett, and I think he found it in me.
Yep.
And that's how we end up forming a firm together, because you just need someone to bounce ideas off. You need, it's sort of your conscience. It's
right.
I always say Brett's, the yin to my yang. And so you really need that balance, so.
But, I think now you guys went out on your own, it's been like 10 years now, or
2008
or
2008,
a little bit.
13
wow,
years
okay.
ago, 13 years.
And so many things that I think used to be real obstacles to setting up your owned firm. For example, there were just, when you think about when you're in a big firm, for example, you're just your information level about things that are happening in other areas of the law. I mean, you're constantly sort of being kept aware of that, you know, because other practice groups are, you know, are circulating memos, or people are drawing your attention to it. And, you know, yes, you don't have that, but we're now in a situation where it's so easy to get information on anything. So that's become sort of less of an, you know, less of an issue than it used to be. And then who knows, you know, what the world is going to look like, you know, when this pandemic ends. Because I think that there have been so many like fundamental changes to how people think of, you know, work and office resources. And I'll give you an example. One thing that just really, it really impressed me, and it really gave me the sense, you know, things have really changed, was last year, toward the end of last year, Ben Walkoff and I were working on a fairly complicated mezzanine loan financing for a client that our client was the borrower. There were 3 banks, there were 3 large law firms on the other side. So obviously it was very document intensive, a lot of negotiations with, you know, different groups of lawyers. You know, we did all this, you know, on Zoom, and we did it, I have to say, pretty deftly. And, you know, it's just such a difference from the way legal work used to be, the way legal services used to be delivered. So, and I think, and then of course, when, you know, because we were borrowers counsel and we were involved in the funds flow memo at the end, you know, we knew what all the other firms were getting paid. And although we had done much more work, I mean, it was us against 3, we actually had a much lower bill. And not only do we have a much lower bill, but we also had a bill that we were very happy with. We were happy with what you know, we took home, because you know, we don't have that corresponding overhead.
I hope you shared that difference with your clients, so that they're aware.
Well, you know,
who they are. I'm sure they're aware.
Again, it was one of those things where, because it's in the funds flow memo, and the, you know, lawyers' fees are coming out of the loan proceeds. Yes, the client knew exactly what the other firms were getting. So and did comment on that. So
yeah. And the other thing about that,
and I think that's the challenge that you guys, I think, and that's the challenge, and that's the opportunity that we're all involved with right now, because we're all, you know, we're all good lawyers. You know, we bat in that league.
Yep.
But now we need to consistently be getting the type of work that large law firms regularly do, because not only are we capable of doing it, but we're capable of doing it more efficiently.
Agreed.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, I don't think, you know, big law is going anywhere. I mean, it's just not. But like you said, it may be there is a transition to perhaps more use of specialty boutique firms that have the same level of lawyering, and just can be a little more nimble, more efficient.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be some clients who need full service under one roof. You know, I used to be part of, back at the big firm, part of a private equity team, and we would work on, you know, distressed transactions, and I was the bankruptcy guy, and there was a M&A guy, and a person, and a employment person, and a tax person, and, you know, there was a whole team of lawyers from different specialties that worked on it. But specialization, on the topic of specialization, you know, you are
great segue, Jeffrey Bast.
Specialist, Alan. You know, you're a finance and transactions guy, but with a distinct Brazil specialty.
Right.
So, you know, and your path to that specialization is a truly unique one that you touched on. But what would you recommend for young lawyers who are looking to specialize in an area that doesn't really, you know, that they don't have a firm connection to?
I think I think you need to find something, find something you're really interested in, and then try to leverage it. If you're really interested in, and then you can, and this is a skill set that is not, necessarily legal,
Right.
but if you're interested in, intellectual property, if you're interested in, in engineering, or if you're, you can take an outside interest like that and then leverage it into a practice specialization, be project finance, or entertainment law, or anything like that. I think I think that it's important for lawyers when they're young to sort of identify something like that they can really sort of marry to their legal practice, because then you're doing something you really like. Because if you're, I think we all know a lot of unhappy lawyers. If you're doing work that doesn't necessarily interest you, that's not an ideal situation.
Right.
So you married your interest and expertise in transactional work, right, and financing type work, with your love of Brazil, is sort of how that came together.
Yeah, and then I was also fortunate that, just as I was starting to come up the ranks, the international debt crisis, which is something, I'm older than you guys, but something that all I used to talk about in connection with Latin America, that really ended. And then, of course, in Brazil, there was a new currency, and they finally conquered inflation. And then all of a sudden, there were just, there was this explosion of Brazilian transactions, and there were only, a handful of people in the market that actually spoke Portuguese. So, again, it was something I really liked doing. So, so it ended up being very, very, very fortunate.
I mean, but that's a great point. I mean, your language skill alone gave you a unique, I guess a unique skill set that made you, a real specialist.
Right.
So that you were a resource that was a scarce resource, if you will. That's probably a better way to put it. And so, that's a great way, non-legal way to differentiate yourself as a secondary language.
Absolutely.
Have you seen growth, Alan? More lawyers coming into that area of practice, or getting that subspecialty like you?
Yeah, I just think there's been a sea change of.
Yeah. What do you think is that? Why do you think that is? Why this change over the years, and sort of all the flood, and I use that word flood, but more lawyers flocking to this type of practice?
Well, let's talk, specifically Brazil.
Yeah.
I mean, when I started out, there were only two firms that were present in Brazil. One was Baker McKenzie, and one was a firm called Couder Brothers, which at the time was a very prestigious international firm that no longer exists. And they had, small presences in Brazil. And now, all the major law firms have very, not only quite present, but they have substantial teams and very nice offices, and it's a major international outpost for many of these firms. So it's changed tremendously.
And how would, if a young lawyer is coming up and has an interest in obviously transactional work, but getting into cross-border practice, what kind of tips could you give a young lawyer, some direction, and how best to maybe do that, position themselves for that?
It's interesting. I would go back maybe even a couple years earlier, even when you're at the undergrad level, because many times people who study languages or literature or history aren't necessarily have much of a quantitative background, or don't really give a lot of importance to sort of hard financial skills. And I think that it's very important, while you're doing your junior year abroad, or you're learning languages, or you're building on the language skills that you acquired through your family. It's also important to remember that you also know how to have to read financial statements and understand some basics of finance, and that maybe doesn't when you're that young doesn't seem that exciting or that glamorous, but you're definitely going to need it.
Right. So it's not enough to have the language skill. You have to understand, the business terminology and accounting and finance terminology.
Yeah, and economic, just things like, what drives interest rates, what drives capital inflows or outflows, and all that sort of thing.
Well, and you also have to obviously have an understanding of the financial system, right?
Right.
In Brazil, and right. I would imagine that you need at least a rudimentary, if not detailed knowledge and working knowledge of the financial system down there.
Yeah, and it's something that's evolved tremendously. It's constantly evolving, actually.
Yeah. And what?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, and what about the court system down there? I mean, I know you're a transactional practice, but is that something that you need to have a good working knowledge of? How the court
it's interesting that you say that, because one thing that a type of transaction that both our firms have worked on, for example, our Chapter 15 bankruptcies, and and as you all know, it's a chapter is essentially derivative of the bankruptcy that's taking place in the main jurisdiction. And if you don't, it is very difficult to follow that if you don't have some understanding of the local court system and local procedure.
Yeah.
Because you're definitely going to be faced with looking at those documents or seeing translations of those documents, and as you both know, legal systems that are not code countries that are not don't adopt common law, their legal systems can be very very foreign to us.
Yeah, and the system down there is obviously very different than here in terms of discovery. You basically give everything over to the judge, right? And the judge will review and make rulings or decisions. So,
well, I would say that the judge is a much more active participant in determining factual matters or things that we would normally consider reserved for a jury.
Right.
The judge is taking a much more active role in the investigation, evaluation of facts, all that sort of thing. Absolutely.
All right, Alan, on the topic of Chapter 15, because as you mentioned, Chapter 15 is the U.S.'s enactment of the Uniform UNCTRAL, there's lots of different pronunciations, but Chapter 15 is a proceeding ancillary to a foreign liquidation or foreign insolvency proceeding, and Brazil recently adopted a new bankruptcy code or some amendments to their bankruptcy code to more coalesce, if you will, with the more international systems, I suppose. And I know you're not a bankruptcy lawyer, but what's your impression of the new bankruptcy amendments in Brazil? Are they?
Well, I think in that regard, it's been a tremendous step forward, because in the U.S., Brazilian debtors are usually the top three of the nationalities that are seeking Chapter 15 protection in the United States. But there's no counterpart in Brazil. And so when you have these cross-border bankruptcies, in countries that had adopted, the equivalent of Chapter 15, there was some sort of, organized manner of, to, distribute assets. and then in Brazil, it would just be a disorganized race to, attach assets. And that is no more. So they have, joined the rest of the world, and it just puts them one step further into, the international economic and legal system.
But it still is, it's still lacking in a lot of ways. It's part of the problem, right? For businesses, it's not, our Chapter 11 system here in the US provides a useful tool for businesses to reorganize, and that hasn't taken in Brazil. And even with these changes, I think the general notion is that they're not it's still deficient in large part.
Yeah, and it's without like getting too theoretical, but there's kind of like a historical reason for this, is that in Brazil, it was, Brazil was largely agricultural until about the 1930s. And it was really industry, and big industry was only really developed through state involvement. And so major industries were state owned, like steel and petrochemicals and petroleum, still is the case. And because of that, as you can probably imagine, one result of that was a bankruptcy system that tended to be very pro-debtor. And it's taken now decades to, let's say, level the playing field. But what was really interesting, was the new law was passed in January. And as I mentioned at the outset, there were a number of vetoes that were, disappointing. And they were vetoes of things that were generally, of particular interest to debtors. And, the society, if you will, or the, the business community came back and managed to get those vetoes overridden through Congress. So that really shows you that there's, things haven't moved as quickly as we would like, but there's a recognition of the direction in which they should go. And there is, political will to make that happen.
How did the Brazilian lawyers and even the court system, the judges down there, view the US system? Whether bankruptcy specific or just generally?
I think, because another thing that we've done for Brazilian clients has been, recognition of foreign judgment. Mm-hmm. And because we represent some, major distressed debt holders and debt funds in Brazil, and there's just always the same thing that you hear is that the legal system just takes so long in Brazil. And we're trying to get judgments enforced now that you can only enforce a judgment when it's final and non-appealable. And these are cases that have wound through the courts in Brazil for like 20 years. So everyone looks at the U.S. As an essentially an efficient legal system, and people who are in the know, I think, are very have a great deal of admiration for the U.S. bankruptcy system.
It's interesting because if you ask, sometimes we get spoiled, right? So clients come to us and, how come things aren't moving quickly? We need to move this thing fast. And, we view bankruptcy actually as moving rather quickly. You need a hearing, you get it. Judges, they see the case, the entire case, or if there's litigation that stems from it, and they get to know the case, they get to know the lawyers, the issues. So you don't have to every single hearing reintroduce everything. And they're pretty available most of the time. And so, I agree with you. Our system does move quickly. And my experience in Brazil is just what you just said, which is it takes a really long time for anything to happen. Which I think is part of the reason why, assuming they can do it, you have some bankruptcy trustees down in Brazil that are coming up here to the States and filing 15s to try to find some assets and recoveries.
Yeah, and and you've had we had one recent. It's something that's discussed a lot in Brazil. Is using Chapter 11, and there's been one really large bankruptcy, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, the LATAM, where they went for Chapter 11 specifically to avail themselves of DIP financing opportunities.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's one of the major deficiencies in the Brazilian system is the lack of DIP financing, which, as I understand, they attempted to overcome that in the amendments, but it doesn't quite get there because part of why DIP financing works in the U.S. is certainty of priority, and that's still, it's still lacking there, right?
Well, I would say the step forward in the legislation was that, it established certainty, but what it didn't establish is that there would actually be many available assets to secure the financing. So because several important lien types remain exempt from bankruptcy. So they did go ahead in terms of legal certainty, but whether it'll have a practical effect, we'll have to see.
Well, interesting stuff. What do you predict in the near future in terms of U.S. Brazil transactions? Are they going to continue to?
It's a big question mark. You have, and again, it's all these things you have to consider. The exchange rates are very favorable. Interest rates are very low in the United States. It's hard to get returns here in the U.S. So people, willing to look for higher returns and take greater risks, we'll be putting money into Brazil. But then at the same time, we have, right now we have an epidemic that's out of control in Brazil, and that casts huge question marks over the direction that its economy will go in. So, and it's terrible as this all sounds. And because of the pandemic, it really is terrible. But this is not necessarily like a new situation. It seems like you're always walking that tightrope in Brazil, where there are opportunities, but the reason there are opportunities is because something domestically is really going wrong. So we've seen that before.
That's why folks will need a lawyer like you.
Right. Exactly. Right. Stability in government, but obviously having good, competent counsel to help, like Allen Moreland.
Thank you.
Alan, where can people reach you?
I'm a partner at Access Law Firm. So, and that's Access is actually spelled, it's actually AXS Law Group. And my email is Allen, spelled like Woody Allen, although I'm not sure that's the best reference right now. Allen at axslawgroup.com is where I'm working.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. And on LinkedIn, you're on LinkedIn as well, Alan?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Excellent.
Actually fairly active on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to appear today and join us, take your time, and good luck. And hopefully you can get back down to Brazil at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, thank you. And I did want to mention, not only, thank you for, allowing me to talking to me today, but I did want to say that, I follow you guys. I follow your social media, which I think is fantastic. And I see a number of initiatives that your firm does that aren't necessarily business related. And, I find it very admirable. So it's an honor to be here talking with you guys.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Alan. We appreciate it. Have a good day. I'm going to stop the recording.